May the meditations of all our hearts be aligned, O God, with you in love, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. I fell even more deeply into love this summer. It started with the giant coastal redwoods whose vast trunks vault into the circle of sunlight, creating the most beautiful cathedral. But I really felt the power of it on the Quinault River, where alder tree roots prevent soil from eroding into the river and leach a healing substance into the water that helps to prevent and cure gill disease in salmon. The alder trees actually help the salmon breathe. The fallen leaves nourish the plankton who feed the salmon who live in the ocean until at the end of their lives they swim back upriver, nourishing bears and eagles and other creatures through whom the salmon make their way back to the trees. Amazingly, the same nitrogen present in the seafaring salmon is present in the tissues of the trees. The salmon is in the trees, and the trees are in the salmon. How could I not fall in love with the beauty of the universe and in the interconnection of all things? The implicate order, as physicist David Bohm calls it, where every atom seeks to remain in relationship with every other atom. We are who we are, and yet, at the same time, we are something more that comes from being a part of the whole. It's wondrous, and it's complex. Simone Weil wrote that the whole universe is essentially a vibration of God. John Philip Newell believes that the Spirit conceived everything that exists. We have been born of this love affair. I found myself on the banks of the river yearning to come into deeper relationship with all things. Thomas Merton wrote that the deepest ground of our being cries out for communion. Because our deepest desire is communion and the desire to live in union is so deep, it's hard to deal with the fault line in each human being and in the world. Violent fractures from Ferguson to Gaza. We are anguished by the imposition of dominance and dehumanization, and all our hearts are broken by the horrific executions of James Foley and Stephen Sotloff, and by the human rights abuses committed by all sides of this conflict. Fortunately, our gospel readings today illuminate powerful resources for reconciliation and healing to take us from hierarchy to holarchy, from competition to completion, from ego strength to soul strength. It's easy to misinterpret the gospel's guidelines for reconciling or expelling a community member from the circle. We really need to get the context and get the picture of what Jesus is talking about. The disciples have just asked Jesus, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? They want to know who the top dog is. They are in a hierarchy mindset in which a person's significance is based on power over others. It fuels competition and exclusion and protecting what you have. And it's based on the false premise that one person's well-being can be separated from another. This kind of thinking leads us to tighten our borders, and it fuels exclusion and expulsion. Jesus challenges the disciples to change how they think about themselves and other people, and he upends their identity by bringing a child into the circle to answer the question of who is the greatest? A child. Who has less authority and power? Who is more dependent than a child? And that fact about us never changes. We are incomplete in ourselves, and we only really know who we are by being connected to the whole, to the love that is at the center of all things. This is the meaning of holarchy. Like the disciples, this can be hard for us because needing others to complete us makes us vulnerable and less powerful than we want to be. Ilia Delio calls this the unbearable wholeness of being. The great French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan likened us to a baby being held in a mirror by a parent. We are delighted to see ourselves in a mirror, beholding the wonder of our own being. This delight in ourselves comes from the center at which God is in love with us. Frailty, messy diapers, and all. But like that baby, our fear of vulnerability leads us to pretend that there's no one holding us up, that we are suspended up to the mirror by our own power. This self-sufficiency is a delusion. God, the loving parent, holds us securely in everlasting arms. Jesus knew that in order to be our truest selves, we must give up our imaginary position as the self-sufficient center of our own universe to find that our true center is everywhere. So Jesus reminds the disciples that we are not alone. The God who longs for us is at the center of everything that is, including our own being. He teaches that the entry point to a life of greatest meaning is daring to recognize our dependence and incompleteness, and then to trust the power of love. Jesus describes a process for handling conflict. Talk, be honest about your experience and perspective, be vulnerable, and work toward reconciliation. Get others to help you dialogue if you can't do it alone. True dialogue is healing and restorative, even when differences continue to exist, because it is based on the sacredness of each person's life. Dialogue not only transforms relationships between people, it alters the consciousness from which relationships arise. Jesus says that when two or more agree about what to ask for, it will be done. And the root word in the original Greek for agree is symphony. How wonderful is it to think the text should be read, be symphonious. Bring your spectacularly created, unique voices into harmony by recognizing the divine in the heart of the other. Respecting difference while valuing oneness is living into holarchy. And what if dialogue fails? Jesus says to pray and stay open to reconciliation. Love with unbridled compassion. That is the sum of the law. That's the way to walk with God. Jesus is not giving rules for kicking people out. We know how ugly this gets when supposedly divine sanctioned authority perpetuates oppression and violence against those deemed excluded from God's circle. At the heart of Christianity is the belief that love can reconcile all things. The great Anglican theologian John Macquarie wrote that reconciliation is God's greatest act, and Jesus is calling us to join the great reconciling movement of God. To be truly reconciled is to see the face of God in the face of every human being, and to decide every issue with concern for the well-being of all. We must refuse to simplify violence and conflict into the categories of those who are good and those who are evil. We must dare to trust love at the center, deploring violence and savagery of all kinds without favoring ourselves or our allies. We must bring the truth of injustice to light, holding those accountable and never losing sight of the divine presence in all people, even perpetrators. And finally, we must take responsibility for our own contributions to gross inequity, the degradation of the earth, and all that contributes to human despair. We can only be our unique selves when we invest in the care of others. This is true freedom. Don't we all long for a love that can endure all things and that is stronger than any brokenness in our world? And here it is, the love that we long for. When Jesus tells us to gather in his name, it's better understood as gathering into my name, with love for me, yearning for union with me. This is the way, Jesus says. Do this. I am with you always. And when you gather from this place of deep connection to the personal presence at the center of centers, then you will have aligned with the passionate force that burst forth this Big Bang universe into being and breathed love into the fabric of all that is. That is the love I felt on the banks of the river, and that we can feel today in our community as we make our commitment that comes from love at the center. Come now to the table of holy longing, you for God and God for you. We ask God to fill us with the love that will heal and empower us to God's great reconciling movement in our world. We ask from a place of deep love, knowing that heaven and earth will be moved beyond all we can imagine. Amen.